There's something haunting about history, not in the way of ghosts, but in the way of echoes. The lives lived in silence, the empires built on belief, the quiet endurance of those who shaped worlds without ever writing their names in stone. Tonight, we step into 4 of those worlds. We'll walk the polished floors of a Kyoto okia, where a young girl becomes a masterpiece of grace and restraint. We'll journey across ancient civilizations, where marriage was never about love, but power, duty, and survival. We'll stand beneath the towering red walls of Malbert Castle, a fortress that witnessed the rise and fall of Crusader kings. And finally, we'll brave the American frontier, where hope was measured in firewood, food stores, and the will to endure winter. These are not just stories of the past. They are lessons in resilience, identity, and the quiet strength of those who live them. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The life of a geisha, from Shikomi to legacy, her 6 years old when your world ends. Not with fire, not with war, but with a bow. You're standing in the streets of Kyoto, dressed in your finest kimono, stiff, itchy, too tight, while your parents kneel before a woman who doesn't smile. Her name is Okosan, the mother of the house. She doesn't greet you. She inspects you, and with a single glance, she decides your worth. Then your parents rise. They don't look back. You've been handed over, not adopted, sold. Welcome to the Okia, the geisha house, a place that looks like a temple, feels like a prison, and functions like a silent war. You are no longer a daughter. You are now a shikomi, a child who scrubs floors, carries tea, and learns to cry without making a sound. Your days begin before sunrise. You sleep in the hallway, on a thin mat, curled like a secret. You eat last, you speak never, you watch, always watching, the geisha who glide past you like ghosts in silk. Their hair is sculpted, their steps are silent. Their eyes say, "You are not here, you are invisible." And that's the point, because this is not school. There are no classrooms, no lessons, no kindness. Your education is in silence, in repetition, in humiliation. You learn how to fold a fan by watching it done once. You learn to pour tea by spilling it 100 times. You learn to bow until your spine threatens mutiny. And you learn control, not just of your body, though that comes slowly, painfully, but of your voice, your breath, your presence. You are being trained not to be seen, but to be felt. To enter a room and shift the air without speaking, to serve tea and command a room. This is not performance, this is transformation, and it begins with pain, posture training, seiza, kneeling 4 hours, legs folded beneath you, back straight, hands folded, face calm. Your knees burn, your calves scream, your blood forgets how to flow. But you do not move, you do not wince, you do not breathe too loudly. Because in the okia, even breathing is political. And then there's the bowing, not one bow, but dozens. A bow for greeting, a bow for gratitude, a bow for apology, a bow for existing too loudly. You learn the precise angle, the exact duration, the subtle shift of weight that says, "I am humble, I am obedient, I am here to serve." You mess up. Of course you do. You bow too fast, too shallow. You touch the floor with the wrong finger. And someone, always someone, corrects you with the quiet intensity of a disappointed ghost. But slowly, something changes. You stop being a child. You start becoming a shadow. And then, one day, the words you've waited for, you're ready. You are no longer a shikomi. You are now a Mako, an apprentice geisha. Congratulations, the real suffering begins now. First, your hair. It's shaved at the forehead, a clean line, like a mask. Then, it's twisted into the Nihongami style, a towering sculpture of black silk and wax, held together by pins and prayer. It takes hours, it weighs pounds, and you can't lie down to sleep. No, you must use the takamakura, a wooden neck pillow shaped like a question. You sleep like a statue, head propped up, afraid to move, afraid to ruin it all with a single twitch. Then the kimono, heavy, elaborate, sleeves so long they sweep the floor. The obi sash tied in a knot, so complex it takes 3 women and a miracle to fasten. It wraps around you like armor. Beautiful, suffocating, expensive, no. And the kanzashi, the hairpins, seasonal, sharp, symbolic. One wrong choice, and everyone knows you've committed a fashion crime punishable by shame. You are art, not a person, not yet. Your debut, Misadashi, arrives like a storm. You walk through Kyoto in your okobo, those wooden platform sandals that click with every step, announcing your presence to the entire block. You wear white makeup, oshiroi, from forehead to neck. Your lips painted only halfway, a sign of youth, of training, of restraint. You are judged, not for your beauty, not for your grace, but for your control. Every smile, every sip of tea, every glance, it's all a test. And if you survive, if you don't trip, don't spill, don't speak out of turn, you pass. You are now a Mako, half child, half porcelain. Full-time performance, and now the daily ritual, the face. It begins with white, thick, chalky rice powder, slathered on like war paint. It dries fast, it cracks, it becomes your skin. Then the eyebrows are shaved, redrawn in thin, dark arcs, like a mask. The eyes, lined with red and black, one brushstroke from disaster. The lips, only the bottom, for now, a tiny red bow, fragile, precise. When you're done, you don't see a girl, you see a doll. A glowing, silent, beautiful doll with the strength of a dancer and the soul of someone who hasn't slept in years. But this face, it's not vanity, it's armor. It separates you from ordinary women. It tells the world, I am not here to be known. I am here to be admired. And beneath it, you learn power. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that waits, your real weapons. The shamisen, that 3-stringed instrument that sounds like sorrow with rhythm. You practice 4 hours, fingers cramping, notes screeching like a cat in distress. Your teachers sigh, raise an eyebrow, send you back to tune it again, but you persist. And the other weapon, conversation. Not just talking, deflection. You learn to flatter without lying, to listen without agreeing, to make a man feel fascinating while mentally planning tomorrow's dance routine. You quote poetry while pouring sake. You laugh softly at bad jokes. You redirect flirtation with a compliment about his sandals. You become fluent in the language of no, without ever saying the word. Ah, how kind of you to ask. Oh, I'm terribly busy that day. What an interesting thought. Each phrase a blade wrapped in silk. And then there's the dana, the patron, not a lover, not a husband, a transaction, a wealthy man who funds your training, your kimono, your survival, in exchange for your time, your presence, your carefully managed company. You don't choose him, the house does, and when he arrives, older, richer, breathing like a tired ox, you smile. You listen, you make him feel important, because your survival depends on it. This is emotional labor, so intense it should be taxed, but you master it. You learn to balance, to give just enough, to keep your soul sealed behind a smile. And then, the okobo. Those wooden shoes that look like punishment, you wear them because you must. Because they make you taller, stiffer, more ceremonial. You don't walk, you glide. Each step a battle against gravity, balance, and blisters. Clop, clop, clop. The sound echoes through the streets. Everyone knows you're coming, and when someone mistakes you for a courtesan, a woman of pleasure, you don't argue. You smile. Ah, How kind of you to be curious. Our traditions are quite different. Then you redirect, with grace, with silence. With the power of a woman who knows she's seen, but refuses to be known. And beneath the beauty, the rivalry simmers. The Okia is not peaceful. It's a battlefield of whispers, missing sandals, and stolen hairpins. One girl wears the same kanzashi as you. How coincidental. Another gets your solo, just a misunderstanding. Your makeup disappears, must have misplaced it. You learn to fight with silence, a compliment that cuts. A bow that's just a degree too shallow. An eyebrow raised at the perfect moment. And then, one morning, it changes. You wake up, and you are no longer a Mako. You are a geisha. No ceremony, no parade, just a shift. Your kimono is simpler. Your hair, finally, is a wig. You can sleep like a normal person. Well, almost, but the real change. You lead now. You don't follow. You don't imitate. You are the standard. You host. You entertain. You charm. Clients don't see you as cute anymore. They see you as powerful, not with a sword, but with a glance, a pause, a silence that speaks volumes. You've mastered subtlety. You've weaponized grace. And now, the weight of legacy settles on your shoulders. You mentor the new Mako. You correct their bows. You demonstrate the shamisen. You smile as they daydream about lunch. And one day, you stand by the door. And a new girl arrives, 6 years old, itchy kimono. Terrified eyes. You look at her, and for a moment, you see yourself. But you don't smile, you just bow. Because now, you are the Okosan, the mother, the judge. The one who decides who rises, and who stays on the floor. Some geisha marry, quietly, strategically. Some become teachers, some simply fade. There is no retirement. No gold watch, no final bow. You just become memory, a name whispered by younger girls, a gesture copied in dance. A way of holding a fan, crisp, precise, silent. You won't be famous, you won't trend. But somewhere, a girl kneels too long, aching, trying not to smudge her lip paint. And she smiles, not because she's happy, but because she's learned. And in that smile, in that quiet, controlled, unforgettable moment, you are still there. Not as a ghost, but as legacy. You were never loud, but you were never forgotten. And in the end, that was enough. Ancient marriage customs across civilizations, long before love letters, wedding rings, or romantic comedies. Marriage existed, but not as we know it. It wasn't about soulmates. It wasn't about passion, or even companionship. It was about survival, a contract, a duty. A transaction written in clay, sealed with silence, and governed by gods, land, and lineage. Tonight, we travel across time and continents to witness how 9 ancient civilizations shaped the institution of marriage, not as a celebration of the heart, but as a cornerstone of society, power, and cosmic order. In Sumer, where civilization itself began, love was optional, but paperwork was essential. Over 4,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of southern Iraq, the Sumerians didn't write love poems to propose. They pressed marriage contracts into wet clay tablets with a stylus. No flowery declarations, no promises of forever. Just assets, dowries, and penalties. The bride brought livestock, textiles, or land. The groom's family paid a bride price, less a gesture of affection, more a deposit on a business arrangement. And YES prenuptial agreements existed here first. If the marriage failed, the tablet spelled out what was forfeited, refunded, or repossessed. Your love life could be audited. Infidelity, especially by the wife, could be punished by drowning. Divorce, allowed, but only with just cause. I've grown bored wasn't enough. Marriage was a cog in the machinery of inheritance, agriculture, and divine order, your spouse. A teammate in a world where surviving floods and feeding goats mattered more than candlelit poetry. In ancient Egypt, marriage wasn't just sanctioned by society. It was mirrored in the heavens. The gods themselves were married. Isis and Osiris, Nut and Geb. Even chaos had a soulmate. Egyptians believed divine pairs maintained cosmic balance, and human marriages were expected to do the same. That's a lot of pressure for a couple trying to keep the household cats from eating the sacred grain. Marriage was the ideal social state. Men married young, women in their early teens. Love wasn't the focus, but affection was valued. Their poetry was tender. My heart flutters hastily when I think of you. She has stolen my heart with her hair. Not Tinder bios, but something close. Contracts were common, especially among the elite. And unlike many cultures, Egyptian women had rights. They could own property, initiate divorce, even sue their husbands for neglect, like failing to provide bread, beer, or oil. Royal marriages often involved incest, pharaohs marrying sisters, not for lack of options, but to emulate the gods and preserve divine bloodlines. And the wedding, simple, no priestly blessing, no grand ceremony, just cohabitation. Move in together, and you were married. The gods didn't need fanfare. Children were the goal, heirs, not happiness. If your wife couldn't conceive, you might take a concubine. Love, optional, lineage, essential. In Sparta, marriage wasn't about romance. It was a state-mandated breeding program. Spartan boys were taken at 7, thrown into the agoge, a brutal training system to forge warriors who could kill with a spoon and eat raw roots without flinching. Girls were trained too, in wrestling, javelin, and sarcasm. Because strength wasn't just for sons, it was for mothers of future Spartans. Marriage was survival. A weak child was a liability. A strong one, a future soldier. The wedding, strange. The bride's head was shaved, dressed in a man's cloak and sandals, left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak in at night, consummate the marriage, and sneak back out before sunrise, returning to his all-out barracks. Yes, even after marriage, Spartan men didn't live with their wives. The relationship, built on secrecy, the idea, to keep desire alive. Too much familiarity might make men soft. And softness had no place in Sparta, yet, paradoxically, Spartan women had power. They could own land, run estates, insult men in public. One famously told her husband, "Come back with your shield, or on it." The ancient Greek version of "Don't embarrass me." Love poems, not popular, but wit, essential. In ancient India, marriage was not a personal union. It was a sacred duty, a spiritual journey governed by Dharma, the cosmic law. Rooted in Vedic tradition, marriage was one of life's essential rites, a bond not just between two people, but between families, lineages, and sometimes entire villages. Arranged marriages were the norm. Horoscopes decided compatibility, because cosmic harmony meant earthly peace. The wedding ceremony, a complex ritual around the sacred fire. The couple walks 7 steps, the Soptapadi, each a vow to nourish one another, to grow in strength, to share wealth, to remain lifelong companions. With each step, they were spiritually united. The wife, Sri Dharma Patni, was both partner and moral guide, managing the household, performing rituals, preserving purity. The husband protected, provided, upheld Dharma. Polygamy existed among elites, but monogamy was ideal. Widows were expected to live in austerity, and yes, sati, the practice of self-immolation, existed, though it was rare in ancient times and emerged much later, far from Vedic ideals. Marriage here was not for passion, but for duty, continuity, and cosmic balance. In ancient China, marriage was not private. It was a Confucian institution, rooted in filial piety, ancestral worship, and family hierarchy. To marry was not to fall in love. It was to honor the past and secure the future under the watchful eyes of the dead. The purpose, continuity of the family line. A son had to marry and produce male heirs, or risk disrupting ancestral rights. Ancestors needed to be fed. A childless home was a broken chain. Matchmakers negotiated terms. Astrological charts were consulted. Compatibility wasn't chemistry. It was heavenly timing. The 6 rites of marriage: proposal, name exchange, divination, betrothal, date setting, ceremony, could take months. On the wedding day, the bride wore red, the color of joy, and traveled in a sedan chair, veiled and silent. She bowed 3 times, to heaven and earth, to her parents, then to her husband, the order of loyalty. Cosmos first, family second, self last. Once married, she entered his household, obeying his parents as her own. Her duty: bear sons, serve quietly, divorce. Rare, a man could dismiss her for disobedience or infertility. A woman, no such right. The bond was revered, but unbalanced. In ancient Japan, marriage was shaped by Shinto beliefs, purity, harmony, and reverence for nature. There were no rigid laws, no centralized doctrine, just evolving customs and regional traditions. In early times, women held relatively high status. They could inherit property, manage estates, wield influence. Marriages were arranged for alliances, land, or continuity. One custom, mukwari, the groom moved into the bride's household, a reversal of patriarchal norms. Later, yumeri, the bride joined the groom's family, became more common. Shinto weddings focused on purification. The Sansan Kudo ritual, 3 sips of sake from 3 cups, symbolizing the bond between the couple, their families, and their spirits. No vows, but deep symbolism. Divorce, possible, especially for infertility or incompatibility, but handled with discretion. Public harmony mattered. Polygamy existed among elites, but not institutionalized. Marriage here was flexible, rooted in harmony, not control. In ancient Rome, marriage was a civic institution, tied to law, class, and public duty. To forms, cum manu, the wife came under her husband's legal authority. Her property became his. She was no longer part of her birth family. And sine manu, the wife retained independence, stayed under her father's authority, and kept her property. This shift reflected growing power for elite Roman women. Weddings were symbolic. The bride wore a flame-colored veil, her hair parted with a spear, a nod to martial roots. The dextrerum junctio, joining of hands, symbolized union. She was welcomed into her new home with fire and water, emblems of purity and life. For elites, marriage was political. Senators, emperors who all used unions to forge alliances, affection, secondary. But Roman women under sine manu could own property, inherit wealth, and initiate divorce. Divorce was common, often as simple as declaring intent before witnesses. Where you are, I am, but if things soured. Parting ways was swift. For the ancient Hebrews, marriage was not a contract, it was a sacred covenant, guided by divine law. Rooted in the Hebrew Bible, it was essential to fulfilling the commandment, be fruitful and multiply. Love was valued, but obedience to God came first. Arranged marriages, bride price mohar paid, not as purchase, but as commitment. Women married young, men slightly older, once they could support a household. Ceremonies were domestic, in the bride's home, followed by feasts, wine, and sacred texts. The ketubah, a marriage contract, protected the wife. It outlined the husband's duties, food, clothing, conjugal rights, and her financial security in divorce or widowhood. Women held honored roles. The woman of valor in Proverbs, wise, industrious, respected. Polygamy existed among early patriarchs, Abraham, Jacob, but declined over time. Divorce, permitted, but discouraged, required a get, a writ approved by religious courts to protect the woman. Marriage here was spiritual, legal, and deeply communal. And among the Celts, marriage was fluid, communal, and tied to the rhythms of nature. No rigid codes, no single doctrine. Customs varied across tribes, Ireland, Gaul, Scotland. But common threads, partnership, fertility, and honor. Marriage could be monogamous or polygynous, depending on status. But one practice stood out: the trial marriage. A year and a day arrangement, live together, test compatibility. If it didn't work, you could walk away, no stigma. This was radical, centuries ahead of its time. Ceremonies often coincided with Beltane, the fire festival marking summer start. Couples leapt over flames, purification, union, blessing. Marriage contracts existed, with clauses on dowries, property, inheritance. Women had legal rights to own land, initiate divorce, even command respect in tribal courts. Abuse or neglect, grounds for dissolution. The spiritual dimension was ever present. Vows weren't just personal, they were bound to the earth, the tribe, and the gods. The couple's union was a thread in the tapestry of land and lineage. Music softens, becomes more reflective. So what do we see? That marriage, across time, across cultures, was never about love. It was about order, about survival, about continuity. It was a tool for alliances, for property, for lineage, for power. And yet, within these rigid structures, love still found its way. In a poem from Egypt, a shared sip of sake in Japan, a whispered vow in a Celtic firelight, the institution shaped societies. But the people within it, they shaped the soul of marriage. And perhaps that's the truth we carry forward. That marriage began as a contract, but evolved, slowly, quietly, into something more. Not because of laws, not because of gods, but because of us, because somewhere, across the ages, someone looked at their partner, bound by duty, by custom, by fate, and chose to stay. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. You stand on the banks of the Nogget River, in the flat, windswept plains of northern Poland. The air is cold, the sky, grey, and rising from the earth like a fortress carved from blood and prayer. Malbec Castle. Not just a castle, but the largest brick fortress in the world. A monument not to kings, but to zeal, to faith, to empire. And its story is not one of glory alone, but of ambition, betrayal, war, and rebirth. This is the tale of Malbec, a castle that began as a crusader's dream, became a theocratic empire, and survived long after its masters were gone. It begins not here, but far away, in the scorching sands of the Holy Land. The year is 1190, the Third Crusade rages, and in the besieged city of Acre, a group of German merchants gather not to fight, but to heal. They form a hospitable order, tending to wounded Christian soldiers. They wear white cloaks with a black cross. They call themselves the Teutonic Knights, but war changes men. And as the Holy Land slips from Christian hands, these healers become warriors. Part monk, part knight, wholly devoted to spreading Christendom, by any means necessary. They need a new battlefield, and in 1226 they find it. Duke Conrad of Masovia, plagued by pagan Prussian tribes, invites them into his lands, to protect his borders, to convert the heathen. The knights agree, but they have a different plan. This is not a mission, it is a conquest. With papal blessing and imperial approval, they carve out a theocratic state, a land ruled not by kings, but by warrior monks. And in 1274, on the banks of the Nogget River, they begin to build their heart, Marienburg, Mary's Castle, a fortress dedicated to the Virgin, but built for war. Brick by brick, they lay the foundation, not of stone, but of red Gothic brick, the bold material of the north. This is no mere stronghold, it is a declaration, a sacred fortress where prayer and battle walk hand in hand, where the sword spreads the cross. And as the decades pass, Malbec grows, not just in size, but in symbolism. By the late 13th century, it is no longer just a castle. It is a triple fortress, the High Castle, the Middle Castle, and the Lower Castle, each walled, each fortified, each serving a purpose. The High Castle is the soul, home to the chapel, the chapter house, the monks' quarters. Its vaulted ceilings rise like cathedral arches. Its narrow windows cast long shadows, light and darkness, truth and chaos. The Virgin Mary Church stands tall, her statue watching over the walls like a silent guardian. Even the latrines are engineered, draining into the river, a sign that the knights brought not just faith, but order to a land they saw as wild. This is not just a castle, it is a monastery wrapped in battlements. A brick and mortar sermon, and as the 14th century dawns, Malbec becomes the nerve center of an empire. The Grand Master rules from here, both Pope and King. Beneath him, a hierarchy of knights, priests, and brothers, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet managing vast estates, tax systems, and trade routes. They are not just warriors. They are colonizers. Forests are cleared. Towns are built. Paganism is crushed. Malbec is no longer just a fortress. It is the capital of a religious state, a theocratic empire stretching across the Baltic. And from its walls, the knights look out, not as guests, but as rulers. But empires built on conquest are rarely eternal. And by the dawn of the 15th century, the knights' greatest enemies stir, Poland and Lithuania. Once divided, now united, by marriage, by faith, by politics. In 1386, Jogaila, Grand Duke of Lithuania, converts to Christianity and marries the Polish queen. He becomes King Władysław II Jagiello, and with that union, the knights' moral justification, the crusade against pagans, vanishes. The ideological ground beneath them cracks, tensions rise, raids escalate. And in 1410, it comes, the Battle of Grunwald, one of the largest and bloodiest battles in medieval Europe. The Polish-Lithuanian army, outnumbered but outmaneuvered, crushes the Teutonic Knights. Their Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, dies on the field. The defeat is catastrophic, and the victors march, not to celebrate, but to Malbec. They lay siege to the fortress. For 2 months, they batter the walls. Arrows rain, boiling oil pours from murder holes. Disease spreads in the camps, but Malbec holds. The new Grand Master, Heinrich von Plauen, a brilliant strategist, refuses to yield. The attackers, exhausted, withdraw. Malbec survives. But Grunwald marks the turning point. The aura of invincibility is gone, the empire is wounded, and though the walls stand, the foundation is crumbling. Debt piles up, war reparations drain the treasury, heavy taxes alienate the people, and in 1454, rebellion erupts. The Prussian Confederation, nobles and townspeople fed up with the knights' rule, appeals to the King of Poland, "Take our lands. Free us." The 13 Years' War begins. At first, the knights hold fast. Malbec remains their jewel, but they are broke. And in 1457, facing bankruptcy, they make a fatal mistake. They can't pay their mercenaries, so the Bohemian soldiers guarding Malbec, the very men sworn to protect it, sell the castle to the Polish king. No siege, no battle, no last stand, just silver. Poland walks through the gates, not as conquerors, but as buyers. The greatest fortress in Christendom falls not to war, but to betrayal and economics. The Teutonic Knights retreat to Königsberg. Their empire is shattered. Malbec is no longer a crusader's dream. It is now a royal residence of the Polish crown. King Casimir IV Jagiellon claims it, not just as a military prize, but as a symbol of Polish triumph. The austere halls of the monks are softened, tapestries hang where armor once stood. Diplomatic feasts replace war councils. Malbec becomes a seat of courtly life, though still seasonal, still ceremonial. The Polish kings visit occasionally, to oversee Prussia, to host dignitaries. But the fortress is no longer feared, It is respected. And though its military role fades, its presence remains. It is garrisoned, it is maintained, it is enduring. Yet peace is fleeting. By the 17th century, war returns. The Swedish-Polish wars rage across the Baltic. Sweden, under Gustavus Adolphus, and later Charles X Gustav, seeks dominance. The Dominion Maurice Baltici. In 1626, they invade Royal Prussia. And in 1656, during what Poles call the Deluge, Malbec falls again. This time, not sold, but surrendered. The castle is looted. Treasures, relics, archives, carted away to Stockholm. The once revered halls echo with foreign boots. For Poland, this is not just loss, it is humiliation. Malbec had stood as a symbol of victory for centuries. Now, it is another casualty of a nation under siege. When Poland regains the castle, the damage is done. Malbec is scarred. Its role as a royal seat fades, its glory dims. And by the 18th century, the world has moved on. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth collapses. In 1795, it is partitioned, erased from the map. Malbec is absorbed by Prussia, and now it is obsolete. Gunpowder warfare has made medieval castles relics. Malbec is too expensive, too awkward, too old. The Prussians repurpose it. The chapel becomes a warehouse. The refectory, a barracks. Some walls are dismantled, bricks reused elsewhere. Locals forget its past, travelers sketch its ruins. Romantic artists see in it a frozen echo of chivalry. But it is neglected, decaying, a shell of faded glory, until the 19th century, when nationalism sweeps Europe and ruins become symbols. For the Germans, now building a unified empire, Malbec, or Marienburg, becomes a myth, a cradle of Teutonic strength. A romanticized vision of knightly virtue, restoration begins. Architects rebuild with passion. Though not always accuracy, some details are idealized. Some are invented, but the spirit is revived. Malbec becomes a national monument. Emperors visit. Paintings, operas, textbooks glorify it. It is no longer just a castle. It is heritage, myth, identity. But history turns again. After World War I, the region is contested. After World War II, it is transformed. In 1945, as Soviet forces advance, Malbec is bombed. Fires gut the interiors, walls crumble. The castle is ruined once more, but this time it is not lost. Malbec becomes part of reborn Poland, and the Polish government begins a new restoration, not to glorify conquest, but to preserve history. Brick by brick, they rebuild, not as a fortress of war, but as a monument to resilience. Today, Malbec stands not as a seat of power, not as a symbol of empire, but as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the largest brick castle in the world, a testament to 8 centuries of European history. Tourists wander its courtyards, children whisper in its halls. Historians study its layers. It no longer defends. It no longer rules, but it remembers. It remembers the monks who prayed here, the knights who died for it, the kings who claimed it, the mercenaries who sold it, the bombers that tried to erase it. And through it all, through fire, war, betrayal, and neglect, it endured. Because some stones are not just built to last, they are built to witness, and Malbec has seen it all. Life on the American frontier was standing on the edge of everything. Not a physical edge, no cliff, no ocean, but a threshold between civilization and world, between safety and risk, between who you were and who you might become. This is the American frontier, and it doesn't welcome you, it tests you. The idea of the frontier didn't begin with a map, it began with a belief. They called it manifest destiny, the idea that Americans were chosen, ordained, destined to stretch from sea to shining sea. That the land, all of it, was theirs by right, by providence, by progress. It wasn't just ambition, It was religion disguised as policy. And so, in the early 1800s, they came, first in trickles, then in floods. Families packed wagons with flour, salt pork, Bibles, and hope. Children clung to their mothers as the wheels rolled west, past the Appalachian Mountains, across rivers, through forests, into a world that had no roads, no laws, no mercy. The Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, the California Trail, names that sound like promises. But the journey was months of dust, disease, and death. Wagons broke, oxen died, children drowned in river crossings, men vanished in storms, and yet they kept going. Because ahead of them was land, free land. The Homestead Act promised 160 acres to anyone willing to farm it for 5 years. All you needed was a dream, a shovel, and the will to survive. But the frontier wasn't empty. It belonged to someone. And as settlers moved west, they didn't just claim land. They erased it, from memory, from maps, from history. The land was never wilderness, it was home. To the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Shoshone, the Nez Perce, nations who had lived here for centuries, who knew the rivers, the seasons, the stars, and now, strangers were building fences, plowing fields, and calling it progress. The frontier was not just a place. It was a collision of dreams, of cultures, of blood. And once you arrived, if you arrived, the real work began. There were no houses waiting, no towns, no stores, just trees and soil and silence. So you built. With your hands, with your back, with whatever you could find. The log cabin, not a home, but a statement, a declaration that you were here to stay. You felled trees, notched the logs, stacked them without nails, sealed the cracks with mud and moss, roofs of split wood, windows of grease paper, if you had any. Inside, one room held everything, sleeping, cooking, eating, birthing, dying, all in the same space, under the same roof. A single hearth was the heart of it all. Fire for warmth, fire for food, fire for light, fire for life. And when the wind howled and the snow piled high, that fire was the only thing standing between you and the void. You didn't live comfortably. You lived purposefully. Every action had meaning. Every tool, a reason, every breath, a choice. And in that cabin, a new kind of family was forged, not by blood alone, but by labor, by loyalty, by shared survival. Food wasn't bought, it was earned. From the earth, from the sky, from the forest. You planted gardens, corn, beans, squash, potatoes, the same crops Native Americans had taught the first settlers centuries before. You hunted deer, rabbits, turkeys, every bullet precious, every kill a victory. You fished in icy streams, you gathered herbs, berries, roots, and you preserved, because winter was coming. And winter didn't care if you were tired, or cold, or grieving. So you salted meat, you smoked it, you stored it in root cellars, deep underground, insulated with straw. You dried fruits, you pickled vegetables. You boiled jars of jam until the seals popped. You stacked firewood, cord after cord, because when the blizzards came, you wouldn't be able to leave the cabin. And if you hadn't prepared, you'd eat less. You'd burn furniture, you'd pray, because on the frontier, hunger wasn't a metaphor. It was a real, gnawing, constant companion. And nature gave nothing freely. It took as much as it gave. But you weren't alone, not completely. Because survival wasn't just about independence, it was about community. When a barn needed raising, the whole valley came. Dozens of men, axes in hand, lifting beams into place in a single day. When a baby was born, women arrived with broth, herbs, and quiet strength. When someone died, neighbors dug the grave, even in frozen ground. These weren't favors, they were laws of the land. You helped because you'd need help. You shared because one day, your child might be the one starving. And in those moments, barn raisings, harvests, quilting bees, The frontier didn't feel harsh, it felt human. News traveled slowly, by word of mouth, by trader, by letter that took months, but when it came, it was devoured. Politics, wars, births, deaths, each piece of information a thread connecting you to a world beyond the trees. And when a preacher arrived, a circuit rider on horseback, Bible in hand, families walked for miles just to hear a sermon. Not because they were always religious, but because they were lonely. And in that shared prayer, in that collective song, they remembered they weren't just survivors, they were a people. Religion wasn't just faith, it was structure. In a world with no courts, no sheriffs, no schools, faith gave order to chaos. It told you how to live, how to die, how to bury your child in the snow and still get up the next morning. And education, it was rare, it was fragile, but it was cherished. When enough children lived nearby, families built a one-room schoolhouse, a single teacher for 8 grades, a Bible for reading, a slate for writing. School lasted only a few months a year, only when the weather allowed, only when the harvest didn't need every hand. But those few lessons, spelling, arithmetic, scripture, were treasures, because knowledge was the only thing no storm could wash away. And then there was conflict, not just with nature, but with people. The frontier wasn't a blank slate, it was a battlefield. Some encounters with Native Americans were peaceful, trade, shared knowledge, even friendship. A hunter might trade a rifle for furs, a mother might learn herbal medicine from a tribal elder. But more often, tension simmered, because every acre a settler claimed was land taken. Every fence was a boundary the tribes had never agreed to. Every treaty was eventually broken, raids happened, on both sides. Settlers feared attacks at night. Children were taught to stay quiet, to hide, rifles slept beside beds. And native communities watched their world shrink, their hunting grounds vanished, their rivers diverted, their children forced into schools that told them their language was wrong. Some fought back, Black Hawk, Sitting Bull, Geronimo, not as villains, but as defenders of a way of life being erased. Others tried diplomacy, others fled, but the tide was against them. The frontier was built on a myth, that the land was empty, that progress was inevitable, that the strong deserved to win, and in that myth there was no room for truth. But through it all, one truth remained: the women of the frontier were its backbone. Not in the way of legends, not with rifles or speeches, but with quiet, relentless endurance. She was the first to rise, the last to sleep. She milked the cow, she churned butter. She cooked, cleaned, mended, gardened, healed. She delivered babies, her own and her neighbors. She buried children, she sat with the dying. She taught her children to read by firelight. She wrote letters that became history. And when her husband died, from fever, from accident, from war, she didn't leave, she stayed. She ran the farm. She raised the children. She survived. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't celebrated, but it was absolute. Without her, the frontier would have collapsed. And the children, they weren't children as we know them. They were laborers. At 5, they gathered firewood. At 7, they tended chickens. At 10, they could shoot a rifle, mend a fence, drive a wagon. Play was rare. Toys were handmade, a rag doll, a carved horse, a hoop and stick, but they found joy in stories by the fire, in rare visits to neighbors, in the first bloom of spring after a long winter. They learned early that life was fragile, that death came without warning, that strength wasn't optional. And in that, they grew up fast, not with innocence, but with wisdom. Then came winter, not a season, a siege. Snow buried the trails, rivers froze, the wind cut like glass. 4 weeks, sometimes months, you were cut off, no travel, no help, no news. The cabin became a fortress, the fire a lifeline. And the silence, that was the worst part, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of connection. Cabin fever wasn't a joke. It was real. It drove people to tears, to madness, to the edge. Women, especially, bore the weight of isolation. Trapped, exhausted, grieving, but still, they endured. They told stories, they sang songs, they mended clothes, they prayed. And every day, they watched the sky, waiting for the sun to rise a little higher, for the snow to soften, for the world to return. And when spring came, with its green shoots, its running creeks, its bird song, it wasn't just a season, it was a resurrection. By the late 19th century, the frontier was closing. The 1890 US Census declared it officially gone. No more edge, no more wild, railroads carved through the plains. Towns rose where cabins once stood, fences divided what had once been open. The myth of the frontier became legend. Men like Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Laura Ingalls Wilder, their lives turned into stories, books, songs, films. But the real legacy wasn't in the myths. It was in the values, self-reliance, resilience, ingenuity, the belief that you could start over, that you could build something from nothing. These ideals became the American dream, but the dream had a cost. The land was won through displacement, through broken promises, through violence. The frontier wasn't just tamed, it was taken. And the people who lived here first, their stories were buried beneath the triumph. Today, the log cabins are museums, the trails are marked with signs. The silence is interrupted by tourists, but if you stand in the right place, on a hill at dawn, where the wind still moves freely, you can almost hear it. The creak of a wagon, the crackle of a fire, the whisper of a woman singing to her child. The frontier is gone, but its spirit remains. In the will to endure, in the courage to begin again, in the quiet strength of those who lived not for glory, but for survival. And in that, the frontier never really closed, it just changed form, and lives on, in the choices we make, in the lives we build, in the stories we tell. You stand now on that same edge, not of land, but of memory. The frontier is gone. No more wagons creaking west, no more log cabins rising from the snow, no more nights where the only light was fire and the stars. But the spirit, it remains, in the will to begin again, in the courage to face the unknown, in the quiet strength of those who built lives from nothing but hope and hard work. They weren't heroes in the way of legends. They were people, parents, children, dreamers, survivors, and in their stories, in the frozen winters, the shared harvests, the letters written by candlelight, we see not just the past, but a reflection of what we're still capable of. So if you found something meaningful here tonight, if this story moved you, even just a little, thank you for staying, for listening, for bearing witness. Because history isn't just about dates and wars. It's about us, and it's always worth remembering. Now, go check on your neighbor, build something with your hands, or just sit by a window and think. And if you'd like to keep exploring the quiet echoes of the past with me, subscribe, not out of habit, but because you feel the weight of these stories too. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I still love seeing who's here, from dusk in Dublin to dawn in Delhi. And if you know someone who needs a reminder of resilience tonight, share this with them. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and remember, the frontier lives not in the land, but in the heart.